Hi and welcome to FreeDU Hub. In our course on ethical hacking, we'll be covering malware and how to stay protected. The objectives and key concepts of the chapter are: we'll understand types of malware and the threats that they pose. Malware detection and prevention techniques would be covered. We'll be covering backdoors and covert channels. As far as the objectives are concerned, we'll list the common types of malware found in the wild. We'll describe the threats and characteristics of different malware. We'll describe the threats posed by the viruses. How can we identify and remove the malware from the computers, and list common behaviors and goals of Trojans. Then we'll list different ways how to detect them, and then how they are created and what's the purpose of backdoors. We'll be explaining the significance of covert channels, and we'll describe the ransomware and its effects on the computers and overall in cybersecurity. Now, if you talk about malware, malware is any software that is hostile, intrusive, or annoying in its operation and performs any actions or activity without the knowledge and consent of the system or owner. So, it could come from the internet, it could come from the USB or any device that you have connected from the computer. It just travels on the computer. It could save on the computer. It can propagate itself on the network. It has different behaviors, and we'll understand it by classifying it into different categories. Has been adopted by criminals for a wide array of purpose to capture the information about the victims or to commit other acts on their computers. So it's completely dependent on the persons who are controlling it, or it's designed in a way that it would affect certain operations of the computers. It includes viruses, worms, Trojans, spyware, adware, scareware, ransomware, and there are more categories to that. It has evolved to steal and destroy the information, such as keystrokes, using the keyloggers, etc. So if we'll try to understand the intention of the malware, it's to capture the keystrokes, the information that you're entering by the keyboard, etc., to gather the information about the credit card, bank account numbers, and other private information. For example, malware has been used to steal information from the people engaging in online investing, shopping, banking, and other gaming channels, etc., where the account information is usually compromised. Now we'll see different types of malware and their targets, etc. So the types which are quite common for a malware, and you might have heard about them as well, they are viruses, worms, spyware, adware, scareware, ransomware, Trojans, rootkits, etc. We'll be explaining them one by one in detail in today's lecture. Now their targets are credit card and data, passwords, inside information, data storage, and rest of the things, etc. Now, if we'll get back to malware targets, if we'll explain the credit card and other financial data, etc., credit card and data and related personal information are a tempting and all too common target. Upon obtaining this information, an attacker can go on the shopping spree, purchasing any type of products or services. Although attackers stealing the payment card information were once limited to online vendors, many brick-and-mortar vendors use online payment processors and can become the victims of the stolen credentials. Then we have passwords. Passwords and another attractive target is another attractive thing for the attackers. The compromise of this sort of information can be devastating to the victim. Despite repeating warnings from the security personnel, most individuals reuse the passwords over and over again. This tendency to reuse the password means that stealing a personal password often opens multiple doors to the attacker. Now, stealing passwords can allow a hacker to access many types of sensitive information that users assume is secure. Insider information means that the confidential or inside information is another target for the attacker. A common attack vector is the use of malware to obtain such information or inside information from an organization to obtain competitive and financial benefit. If we talk about data storage, in some cases, a system infected with malware may be co-opted for storing the data without the owner information. Uploading data to infected system can turn that system into a server hosting any content. Now, this can include illegal audio, video, pirated software, etc., or financial data, or any kind of unauthorized or illegal information. Now, we'll be looking at viruses. And when we talk about viruses, viruses are the oldest form of malware softwares which are available. Term is frequently used to refer to all kind of malware, but it is one of the categories which falls under the under malware. It's a piece of code or software that spreads from system to system by attaching itself to other files. So it has the capability of to spread itself in the system by attaching itself to different files. For example, it can attach itself to picture files, audio files, video files, Word documents, etc., and it would corrupt all the related extensions on which it is actually targeted for. Virus activities when virus activates when the file is accessed. So if you'll, for example, try to open the Word document and a virus is attached to it, it would be activated and then it would start working as it's designed to do. Upon activation, the code carries out the attack or the other action the author wishes to execute, destroying or corrupting the information, etc. Now we'll look at some of the basic details like history about the viruses. In 1971, a virus creeper was released, and in mid-1970s we had a Webbit virus. In 1982, L-cloner virus was there. In 86, boot sector virus was there, which used to sit on the boot sector of the computers. Now in 1987, the first concept of logic bombs came. And then in 1989, multipartite virus came. We'll be covering it shortly. And then 1992, we had polymorphic viruses. And in 2008, the one which created lots of problems and affected the computers was Mockmex. Now, the modern viruses and virus writers have gotten much and more creative in their efforts. They commonly work in teams and in some cases are financed by criminal organizations to build their software and to target specific organizations. Now we have certain categories over here which are different kinds of viruses. We divide them into logic bomb, polymorphic virus, multipartite, macrovirus, and hoaxes. So let's explain what is a logic bomb. Logic bomb is designed to go off on a specific date or time when a specified event occurs. So it is designed to wait for an event, and then when it happens, it would start working. Now, sometimes it happens that a person, for example, if he is leaving the organization, he or she might plant some logic bombs, and they would trigger as per the deadlines or as per a specific event. For example, if they'll define it that the logic bomb would go off if the person would try to take the backup, it would automatically execute, and maybe it would delete the backup or it would delete the all previous backups which were saved in the repositories. Now, for logic bombs, keep in mind that they are notorious, difficult to detect because of their nature, but they are harmless until they become active. Malware of the type is simply dormant until whatever is designed to look for it happens, either a positive or negative trigger event, which is coded in by the creator, activates the logic bomb. A positive trigger is a mechanism that looks for an event occurs, such as a date. A negative trigger could be designed to monitor an action. When such action does not occur, it does not go off. An example would be if a user does not log in for some period of time. The process of hiding until an event does or does not occur makes the particular type of the malware dangerous. So that's the basic logic behind a logic bomb. Second, we have polymorphic virus is enabled to change its shape and avoid antivirus programs and detection. So it keeps on changing its shape so that it remains or works in a stealth mode so that the antivirus softwares cannot detect them easily. So we can say that polymorphic viruses employ a series of techniques to change or mutate. There are two categories in it: polymorphic engines and encryption. So polymorphic engines are designed to alter and mutate the device design while keeping the payload and the part that does not damage or it remains intact. So it would keep on changing its shape, but the payload would remain the same and it would still affect the system. Encryption used to scramble the data or damage the payload, keeping the antivirus engine from detecting it, and it would still keep on operating in the background without being identified by the antivirus programs. Now, when they are in action, polymorphic viruses rewrite or change themselves upon and every execution. The extent of a change is determined by the creator of the virus, and when included a simple rewrite to change the encryption routines, or it could alter its code itself. Modern antivirus software is much better equipped to deal with the problems that polymorphic viruses pose. Now, the techniques to detect these type of viruses include decryption of the virus and the statistics analysis and heuristics designed to reveal the software behavior. That's why you might have seen that lots of the antivirus softwares nowadays that we have, it's usually signature based detection rather than looking for the name of the applications and then blocking it itself. Then we have multipartite virus. It infects using a multiple attack vectors, including the boot sector and executable file on a hard drive. Now, what makes these kind of viruses dangerous and powerful weapon is that to stop them, you must totally remove them and their parts from the hard drive. If any part of the virus is not deleted from the infected computer, it can reinfect the system itself. So it works just like in pairs. If one part is available over there and deleted, if it came for example in a pair and it infected the computer, if one part is deleted, it would recreate the other one, and if the other one is deleted, it would create the first one again. Multipartite viruses represent a problem because they can reside on different locations to carry out different activities. Such as a virus has two parts, one can sit on the boot sector and others can infect the files, etc. If the boot infector is removed, the file infector will reinfect the computer. Conversely, if the infector is removed, the boot sector infector will reinfect the computer. So they work in hand. Now we have the macroviruses. Macroviruses infects and operates through the use of the macro language. You might have seen that if you are opening any Word document or an Excel sheet, and if you have written a macro behind it, usually the macros are written in VB language, just to add some features to the Excel sheets or to make the things easier, you'll see a notification that there is a macro attached to this document. If you will accept that you want to enable the macro, it would be activated on the computer. So we'll have to make sure that the documents and Excel sheets that we are receiving, if we are accepting the macros which are attached to those documents. Now, macros help users to automating repetitive tasks. Macros viruses have been very effective because users have lacked and the protection of the knowledge and the countermeasures for them. Macroviruses can be implemented in different ways, usually by being embedded into a file or spread via email. The initial infection spread quite quickly because earlier applications would run the macros when a file was just opened or when an email is viewed. Since the debut of this virus, most modern applications have by default disabled the macros feature to ask the user whether they want to run the macros or not. Now, hoaxes are not a true virus but designed to get the user to take action even though no infection or threat exists. Now we'll talk about some prevention techniques which are there in order to protect ourselves from these kind of problems. First is education, then antivirus, and then applying the updates and patches. So if we talk about education, knowledge is half the battle. It's getting the system owner to understand how not to get infected or spread viruses is a huge part of the shopping or to stop the problem. Users should be instructed on proper procedures to stop the spread of the virus code. Recommended guidelines to share them generally include, for example, you can tell them that don't allow the persons to bring untrusted, unprotected media. USB or anything from home to connect it from the PCs. There should be instructions for the users not to download any files from any untrusted sources. Don't allow the personnel to install the softwares on the computers without the permission of the IT department. You can inform the IT or the security department if you are facing any strange behavior on the computer or any strange notifications. Further, you can limit the use by giving them restricted accounts, and they must not have any administrative privileges on the computers. The second way is the antivirus anti-malware software, which is designed to stop the spread and the activity of the viruses and other malware. Now, nowadays, the antivirus softwares that we have installed on the computers, they come in equipped with antivirus, anti-spam, anti-malware, even network protection, firewall, etc. So they are providing us a high level of protection on these computers. Now, active antivirus solution software tend to use two methods in order to detect the viruses. The first is suspicious behavior method, which is used to monitor the behavior of applications on a system. This approach can detect suspicious behavior in existing programs as well as suspicious behavior that indicate a new virus may be attempting to infect the computer. The second method is dictionary-based detection, which focuses on scanning the applications and other files when they have access to the system. Now, this method can detect a virus almost immediately instead of letting it run on the computer and detecting the behavior later. This downside is that this method can detect only viruses that is known or for which the definitions have been updated. If you neglect the update of the software, it cannot detect the viruses which has recently been released on the internet or through any files, etc. The last thing that we can do in order to prevent the viruses and other malwares, etc., is by applying the updates and patches of the system and software. So it's our responsibility to make sure that if there are any new patches released by Microsoft for the operating system or any other applications that you are using, you must immediately install the patches and the updates for those softwares, because they are releasing those updates after being notified of some known vulnerabilities in the operating systems or the applications. Now let's talk about another category, which is called worms. Now, worms are self-replicating piece of software that combines the convenience of the computer networks with the power of the malware. Now, it does not require a host, just like a virus. It requires a host. It is a self-contained thing. It does not require user intervention. In viruses, it required the user intervention to open the file to spread it. It replicates rapidly. It consumes the bandwidth and the resources of the computer, and it can transmit information from the victim system to another systems, and it is capable to carry the payload such as a virus. Now, since we have understood the worms, we'll try to learn the techniques. How can we stop the worms? The first thing we can do is that we can patch the systems. For example, we can protect our systems, but it does not protect from the zero-day exploits. Zero-day exploits are those exploits for which the cure is not yet available, in which the hole can be exploited immediately. So they'll identify once they'll read it in the news or on the security channels that for the that some vulnerability has been identified in a system. They'll look for those vulnerabilities, and then they'll try to exploit it using those vulnerabilities. Now, education is that how to open the email safely, educating the users, just like there was a very common virus called I Love You. Now, these kind of subjects prey on the user's curiosity. The user opens the message and unknowingly run the worm, which runs in the background, and it adds the attack in such as a phishing email, which is further a plague that the user is curious about, and they can have a problem that only education can address that. Do not respond to the phishing emails that you are receiving, anything like that. Have a proper antivirus which can protect you for these kind of problems, and a firewall gives you an additional layer of protection where it is protecting you for any infiltrator who's trying to enter your system from outside. It would notify you, so you can take the appropriate actions in order to stop that sort of attack. Now, that brings us to another category that we call Trojans. Now, when planned and implemented correctly, they can grant access to the system on behalf of the attacker, allowing all sort of activities to take place. So, by deploying a Trojan, it opens certain ports on the computer which would allow the person who is remotely sitting, who has planted that Trojan on the computer, to take over the resources of the computer, to access the computer remotely and run different operations on that. Users can coerce into installing or running the software that looks legitimate but hides a payload that does something unwanted, such as opening an avenue that an attacker can use. Now, it can operate on a principle, for example, permitting what you cannot deny. In other words, using the ports such as mechanisms on the system that must be left open on the system to function normally. For example, port 80 and 21 is usually open, which allows us to perform certain operations on the computer. Now, the list of the pieces of software that can be Trojaned is endless. It includes anything that the creator believes will enhance the victim to open the software or the program. So, applications like games or any messaging software, media players, social media apps, or even any files or documents that you are opening. For example, the attacker can choose popular games as a distribution method by downloading it, infecting the system, and posting it on popular download sites. Another approach is to create game or other useful apps specifically as a vehicle to deliver the malicious payload to the computers. As the number of mobile devices are growing, the software applications are designed for the Android and iOS operating systems have become common targets for to be used by the Trojans. Now, by choosing the popular piece of software that people are willing to download, the attacker increases the chances of achieving the higher infection rate. Now, we have different type of Trojans which we can understand over here. First is remote access Trojan, we call it RAT, then info stealing, downloader, distributed denial of service, and rootkits. So when we are talking about RAT, which is remote access Trojan, it's designed to give an attacker control over the victim's computer. Typically, this malware works in two components, a client and server. The client is installed on the victim's device, and it allows the covert communication from one or more attacker servers. Then we have info stealing. It captures and redirects the data to an attacker. This type of the data or the type of the data these Trojans can capture range from keystrokes, passwords to any other type of information that may generate or reside on the system. This information can be redirected to a hidden file or even can be transmitted via email if a predefined email or social media account exists on that computer. Then we have downloader. It downloads additional exploits on compromised devices. Then we have distributed denial of service, use a network of compromised devices to detect a specific service or server, overwhelm it, or shut down the services. Rootkits are the Trojans that acquire root access. For example, the administrative access. In Linux, we call it root access. On Windows, we call it administrative access to a device that allows the attacker to use the victim system to perform certain operations. Now we'll see what are the uses of a Trojan. The Trojans can be used for data theft, installing the softwares remotely on your computer, downloading or uploading files from the computer, modifying or deleting the files. It can even install the keyloggers, which would keep track of all the keys that you press on a day, and then they'll be sending it silently to the person who have installed it. It can even remotely view the user screen, what he's doing all day on the computer, consuming the computer storage space by filling in the garbage, etc. on the computer or the temporary files. And then it can even crash the victim's computer by installing certain things which are not required by them. Now, Trojans are commonly grouped with viruses in malware classification schemes, but this is not entirely correct. The Trojans are similar in certain ways to viruses. For example, they attach to other files which the user or a person would carry. They differ, however, in a way that they are designed to replicate on the computers. The method of distribution of Trojans is actually quite simple. They attach themselves to another file, which is then retrieved or executed by an unsuspecting victim. Once the event occurs, the Trojan typically grants the access to the attacker's computer and can do some other operations on behalf of the attacker remotely on that computer. Now, Trojan requires instructions from the hacker to fully utilize the potential of it before it can distribute itself. In fact, the majority of the cases, Trojans are not actually distributed past the initial stages by their creators. Once the attacker releases their code into the world, this switches their focus from the distribution to the listening phase, waiting for the Trojan to call from home and indicating it to infect the computer, or it would wait for the instructions of the user. Now, what are the different uses of Trojan? How a Trojan works? It can attach itself to a file. The file is retrieved and executed by an unsuspecting victim. The Trojans then typically grant access to the attached computer and can do other operations. Trojan require instructions from the hacker before it would start the distribution process of it. Now, there are different targets of a Trojan. It can have the financial gain, it can look for your passwords, it can look for the information which is stored on the computer, and more. For example, if we are talking about different things that it can affect the overall changes on the screen, it can change the right click and left click buttons, etc. of the computers, etc. So it's all capable of doing all those things. Now, the known symptoms of an infection on a computer could be, for example, if your CD-ROM drawer is constantly opening and closing, it is a sign that maybe your computer is infected with any sort of virus. It can change the resolution, flip the icons, etc. The screen resolution can change itself. It can print the documents itself. The browser would redirect you to a website which you are not aware of. Then it can change the screensavers, etc. It can even play with the right click and left click buttons of the computer. So it is capable to perform certain operations which are quite weird and they are not normal on a computer. The mouse can disappear, or the pointer would disappear. The start button could disappear. The chat boxes can open. It can even show the ISP messages that you are running, that ISP or internet service provider is running certain scans on the computer. It can shut down the system, or the taskbar can appear and disappears from the computer. The account password can be changed, and if you'll try to log in, it would say that the password has been changed, or you'll have to enter a new password. Maybe the account could be accessed remotely, unknown purchases could be there, or the statements could appear, or credit card bills on your accounts. It can dial in and connect to the internet by itself. Control or delete, for example, command can stop working, or although the computer is rebooted without your intervention. Now, in the next one, we'll see the detection techniques of Trojans. The background is that Trojans need to attach to the system through the use of a port. Some Trojans use well-known ports that can be easily detected. Other Trojans may use the non-standard or obscure ports that are or will require a little extra effort to investigate and determine that which ports are listening on the computer. Now, since you know that there are 65,535 ports on the computer, now it can infect or attach itself to any of the ports and see if it's listening. It would try to penetrate through those ports. Now, how can you detect it? You can use netstat, which is a built-in feature or a command that you can use on a command prompt. It can show you all the open ports, vulnerability scan, and antivirus and anti-malware software can detect it as well. Now, here they are showing that if you are using netstat -a, if you can see, I have command prompt, and if I'm writing netstat and I'm using -a, it is showing me all the ports on which my computer is listening, and then it is even identifying the port on which it is listening for that specific service. So that's how netstat works. And then we can even see it through the PowerShell, and if we are running nmap command on that, it can tell us that all the ports and the different services which are running on the computer. It would even identify the services which are running against the ports, just like 135, 139 and 445, and what are the behavior of those ports on the computer. Now, if we are talking about vulnerability scanners, we have different vulnerability scanners. These are the additional tools for the malware detection. Software of this type can be used to scan the system and locate and report back to the services of any Trojans or listening ports on the system. There are lots of vulnerability scanners available on the internet. The first one is Nessus, is very known and powerful system in order to detect any sort of vulnerabilities, and as you can see, it is closing your cybersecurity exposure gap with the Nessus, etc. Then we have OpenVAS. You can use this one also. They have quite a comprehensive set of behavior where they can scan open vulnerabilities, assessment on the system, etc. And then there is another tool which is OS, which is Open Worldwide Application Security Project. Now it includes a more comprehensive list of currently available vulnerability scanners, etc. that you can find on their website. Now, if we'll talk about the distribution method, the first distribution method for these kind of viruses or worms on the network is through wrappers. Attackers merge intended payload with the harmless executable file to create a single executable file. New executable is posted in some location where it's likely to be downloaded. For example, if you have downloaded a file, it would ask you to go to a certain website and then download the file, or once you'll download the file, the additional file will be downloaded from the rogue source itself. Example, an attacker downloads an authentic application from a vendor website. It uses a wrapper to merge the Trojan onto the application and post it to the download or to the other location. Now consider a situation where a wannabe attacker or a hacker downloads an authentic application from a vendor website and uses wrapper to merge a Trojan such as a tiny banker, etc. onto the application before posting it on a download site which he has created himself and distributing the software through that or through any other location. Now, some more advanced wrapper style programs can even bind together several applications instead of just one or two which are mentioned here. Now, what looks like harmless to the downloader is actually a bomb waiting to go off on their system. When the victim runs the infected software, the Trojan is installed automatically and takes over the system. Wrappers tend to be one of the tools of the choice for the script kiddies because of their relative ease to use and overall accessibility. Hackers in this category find it effective for their purpose, where they can easily bind or they can add the payload to the actual applications that you can find on the websites. Now, in distribution methods, we have Trojan construction kits as well. Now, they are in three categories. For example, Trojan construction kit itself, then we have SanaSpy, and we have Stealth tool. Now, these kits have made the process of creating Trojans so easy that even people with the knowledge equivalent to an average script kiddie can create new and dangerous entities without much effort at all. Now, if we'll talk about Trojan construction kit, that's the first one. It's one of the best examples of relatively easy to use potentially destructive tool. This kit is a command line based, which may make it less accessible to an average person, but it is nevertheless very capable of if it is in the right hands. With a little bit effort, it is possible to build a Trojan that can engage in such destructive behavior such as destroying the partition tables, playing with the master boot records of the hard drive, and making sure that it destroys the operating system or it can stop the operating system from loading. The second one is a SanaSpy. It's another Trojan creation kit that is capable of custom options such as transfer or execute DOS commands, keyboard control, and list the control processes, etc. Then we have stealth tool. It's a program used not to create Trojans, but rather assist them in hiding it on the computer. In practice, the tool is used to alter the target or to move it, the file in bytes, etc., changing the header or splitting the files or combining the files so that it remains undetected on the computer. Now we'll be talking about backdoors. Now backdoors, they help in the password cracking. In rootkit, service backdoors are there, and then there are process hiding backdoors. Many attackers gain access to their target system through backdoors. The owner of the system compromised in this way may have no indication that someone even penetrated on his system. Typically, a backdoor will achieve one or more targets on a system. It can provide the ability to access the system regardless of the security measures that the administrator might have implemented on the computer. To access the computer, it can provide the ability to gain the system while keeping a low profile. This would allow the attacker to access the system and circumvent logging and other detective measures, etc. It can provide the ability to access the system with minimum effort in minimum amount of time. Under the right conditions, a backdoor will allow the attacker to gain access to the system without having to hack it again. Now, some of the common backdoors that are placed on a system are password cracking backdoor. Now, these backdoors rely on the attacker uncovering and exploiting the weak password that have been configured by the system owner. Now, system owners who fail to allow accepting guidelines for creating strong passwords become vulnerable to attack of this type. A password cracking backdoor, in fact, may be the first attack an aggressor will attempt because it provides access to the known accounts which are there on the computer. In this event, another account was used to crack the password. The system owner may find this account and shut it down. However, another account which is compromised as well would be there on the system. So if the administrator would change the main password, they will be able to access the system from the second account which they have created it, just in case that if the password is changed for the primary account, they'll be able to access it through the secondary account. Now, there are rootkits. The attackers may also create backdoor replacing the existing files of the system with their own version of the files. Now, using this technique, an attacker can replace the system files on the system, and they can have they can alter the behavior of a system to a very fundamental level. This type of attack used the rootkit and specially designed a piece of software that replaces these files with different versions. After the rootkit is installed on the system, it would do something. It would behave differently by design. The ability to obtain trustworthy information from the system may be questionable because now the overall security of the system has been compromised. Then we have services backdoor, network services and another target for the attackers for modification and to open a backdoor on the computer. When a service runs, the process runs on the computer, for example, on port 80 or 21. Once the service is answering to a port, the attacker can attach itself to the port and issue commands to the service that has been compromised. An attacker can use various means to get compromised services on the system, but in such cases, the service installed is one that the attacker can use or can modify by configuring it on those specific ports and to use it for their own purposes. Now, process hiding backdoors are the attacker is a place where the attacker wants to stay undetected for as long as possible, with typically take an extra step of hiding the software which are running on the computer. Now, programs such as compromised services, password crackers, sniffers, and other rootkits are the items that an attacker will use or want to configure it to avoid the detection on the system. Now, the technique is that it would include renaming the package or to rename the legitimate program or alter the files on the system to prevent them from being detected in the system. Now, once the backdoor is in place, the attacker can use it to access or manipulate the system as per their own requirements. Now next we are talking about the covert communication channels that would transfer the information using the mechanism that was not designed for that purpose. Now trusted computer system evaluation criteria had covert storage channels and they had covert timing channels which are defined. Now covert storage channels, these channels include all mechanism of process that facilitate the writing of the data to a location by a service and then reading it by another thing. Now these type of channels can involve either the direct or indirect writing to a location such as hard disk or flash drive, etc., by one process and subsequently direct or indirect the accessing or reading the storage location by different access or the process or the services, etc. Now if we are talking about covert timing channels, these channels send their information by manipulating the resources usage on the system to send a signal to a listening port, such as the attack is carried out by passing unauthorized information via the manipulation of the system resources. For example, the blinking of the hard drive, activity lights, and the computer screen, etc. One process will manipulate the system resources in a specific predefined way. These responses will interpret the second process or the service. Despite this relatively low data transfer rates used, the covert timing channels can become overlapping, which can overtake the system, which is an air gap with the lack of communication or the transferring of the information to the system. Now there are different tools which are used and they are explained over here. Loki is a tool which was originally designed to be a proof of concept of how ICMP, which is the ping traffic or the ping command, is used on the computer. It is used to pass the information inside ICMP echo packets, which can carry the data payload, but typically do not, because the ability to carry that data is present on the system but is unused. This can make the ideal covert channel. Then we have P-tunnel. This tool is also used to create a covert channel by transporting the TCP traffic using ICMP 007 shell. This tool uses ICMP packets to send information but goes to extra step by formatting the packets so that they have a normal size, etc. And convert, this tool hides the traffic of the file transfer by converting the packet and make them look like a regular communication. Then we have ICMPTX, which is IP over ICMP. The software utility allows the user to set up the internet protocol tunnel using ICMP, potentially bypassing the authentication controls, etc. Then we have the ACK command, the program that provides command shell on the Windows system. Covert communication occurs via the TCP acknowledgement replies, etc. Now next thing over in the list is keystroke loggers. Now keystroke loggers can capture the report activity the system informs of the keyboard usage on a target system, etc. So it would keep track of all the keys which are pressed. Now the softwares are installed like different softwares which are Spyrex keylogger, and there are lots of other keyloggers which are available. Some are free and some are smart enough to hide their identity on the computer. Now hardware-based keystroke loggers are plugged into a universal serial bus or as a USB to the computer, and it would keep track of all the keys which are pressed on the computer. Now we have port redirection. Now in port redirection, the communications are redirected to the ports other than their original destination. It's done by setting up a piece of software that is listening to a specific port. When packets are received, traffic is sent from one system to another. We use a command netcat with the help of which a simple command line utility is available in Linux, Windows, and Unix operating systems. It's designed to function to reading the information from the connection using the transmission control protocol or UDP protocol by simple doing a redirection of the traffic. Now you can even use the netcat in order to open the communication channel between two computers. Just keep in mind that netcat is not installed by default. You'll have to download and install it on your computer in order to make it run, and then there are different switches that you can use in order to have the specific or the right functionality of it. Now we can even use the port redirection. Steps involved for the netcat to perform the port redirection. The hacker can set up a listener on the computer by passing the commands like this one, and the attacker can execute a command on the victim system by redirecting the traffic from the one system to another. For example, if we'll enter the IP address of the hacker through the port 80, and we are using the command line over here to do those operations. Now the command shell, the victim system would be the attacker's command prompt by the input, which can be passed on the computer using the commands which are quite famous for that. Now we have spyware. Now spyware are designed to collect and report information on the user's activities without the user knowledge and consent. For example, it can look for the browsing habits, keystrokes, the software that are used, and the general usage of the computer, etc. Now there are different methods of infection on the computers. For example, peer-to-peer, the delivery mechanism has become very popular because of the increase of the number of softwares that we are using on peer-to-peer networks, etc. Social media and teleconferencing, delivering the malicious software via the social media and teleconferencing, etc. Because more users are connected and they are exchanging the files through that. Email attachments, because email are received on daily basis, and there is a facility to attach certain email attachments with that. And if the user would download an attachment which is infected, it would infect the computer. Physical access. Once the attacker gains the physical access to the victim system, it becomes relatively easy to install the spyware on the computers. Browser defects. When a user would forget to choose the update or would not update the browsers, there are high chances that it would be infected by any kind of spyware, etc. Or a freeware. Downloading a free software unknown from an untrusted source would even download some of the additional files which you would not like to install it on the computer yourself. Next, we have bundling with the software. Example, a user download a legitimate piece of software from a website. It would install. During the installation process, the user is prompted to install the additional softwares, and the user often believes that the software is coming from a legitimate source, and it would install that additional software that would infect the computer, since the additional software which is installed is not coming from the legitimate source. Other ways get spyware on the system is by installing a strategically placed checkboxes to install the spyware when the application is running in its default behavior. Beware of any attempts of the software to install additional programs. When an attempt should be there, it should be reviewed, or it should be considered as a suspicious thing. Now, when we are talking about adware and scareware, adware are the software specifically designed to display ads on the user computers and to perform the pop-ups, etc. on the screen, and are often associated with the spyware, etc. So these are the advertisements which would appear on the screen, and by mistake, if you'll click on it, it would download the payload on your computer, which would open a port on your computer through which the remote penetrator can gain access to the computer. Scareware is a type of malware designed to tricking the victims into purchasing and downloading the useless and the potentially dangerous softwares on the computer. Now, a ransomware is designed to hold the victim's data hostage, and then it is placed on the victim's computer using one or more of the same techniques that are used to install another type of malware. Once the victim's computer does one of the following, for example, it threatens to send a private message or a personal data to the attacker that will encrypt the system if you'll not pay a certain amount using the Bitcoin. It can encrypt the large volume of the hard drives or the computers on the entire network. It requires a ransom to be paid to avoid the release of the extracted data or to gain the decryption key before you can access the data on your computer. Now, the best technique in order to combat against the ransomware, etc., is to install and maintain a proper anti-malware and antivirus. I would suggest having a security suite to have a complete protection on your computer, and make sure that this software is constantly updated and it's getting the latest definitions from the vendor. Apply the latest patches for the operating system or the applications that you are using. Back up the data from time to time, so that in case anything like that happens, you can easily format the computer and restore the backup. Restrict the files from running in the data folders or shared folders, etc., and don't allow any remote desktop connections to the computer itself. That brings us to the end of the chapter, and just to summarize the things, we covered the type of malwares and the threats that they pose. Malware detection and prevention techniques were covered, and then we covered backdoors and covert channels. That's it for today. Thank you very much.